YouTube! I am here to talk to you today about Afterworlds by Scott Westerfeld, which came out September 23rd, so just a little while ago. I got the pleasure of reading this book a little bit early, and then I got to interview Scott Westerfeld in a live show on an app called OK Hello, which was a crazy experience. Not very many people get to immediately speak to the author who wrote the book that they just finished reading, and I'm so thankful that I got to do that. It was just one of those crazy things that happened, and I was just so happy. So, without any spoilers, Afterworlds is a book about a girl named Darcy Patel who actually participates in NaNoWriMo. He never refers to it as NaNoWriMo, but he says she wrote the book in an entire month in November, which obviously is NaNoWriMo. So she writes this book in NaNoWriMo called Afterworlds, and she submits it, and the people at the publishing company Paradox love it, and they give her a $300,000 book deal, and she moves to New York, and she's then sort of thrust into the world of being an author and doing rewrites and all of that. Alternately, the other chapters of the book are you actually getting to read Afterworlds. So this book is very sort of unique and different because it is 600 pages. It's a long-ass book, but it includes two books in it. It includes Darcy's story about getting her book published and learning about being in that world, and then it also includes the actual story that she wrote about a girl named Lizzie. Afterworlds is a story about a girl who figures out how to get to the afterworld, which is sort of this place between life and death. I don't really know what else to say about it without like spoiling big parts of the story, but it explores her learning about this world and finding out what she can do there and getting more powerful and all of this stuff. Every other chapter switches back and forth between these two stories, which I liked, but it was also a little whiplashy, I'm not gonna lie. At the end of each chapter, you had to completely reorient yourself in the story because it was actually switching to another story. And while there's some amount of feeling out how the two stories like influence each other, you know, things that are happening in Darcy's life sort of end up being mirrored in her story about Lizzie and vice versa, and so that's kind of a fun thing to see, but you are actually legitimately reading two different stories, and it can get a little confusing and sometimes a little exhausting to go back and forth. I don't know if I loved that element of the story. I think it was really unique and interesting, and I got through it obviously, but I had a little bit of trouble with it sometimes. I didn't feel that drive to keep reading after each chapter. I sort of had this moment of like, well, I'm gonna switch to a totally different story. I could stop right now. And that's a little disruptive, I think, to being immersed in a story. I really enjoyed the book, though. I think the beginning especially is awesome. I think they both of the stories sort of start at this climax, and it really just drives forward, and so you get hooked immediately. It sort of tapers off a little bit for me, which is interesting because one of the biggest notes that Darcy got from her editor was that she loved the first chapter because it's this really high-stakes terrorism scene, and then after that it gets a little muddled, and what you're reading in this book is the final draft of Darcy's story, but I didn't feel like that was totally fixed. Before I get to the point of this video where I spoil a bunch of stuff, I just want to say that I think that this is a really different book from Scott Westerfeld. I'm a big fan of his. I loved his Uglies series. I read So Yesterday, I read Peeps, and I loved pretty much everything I've ever read of his, and this one is very different. You can still tell that it's Scott Westerfeld, but I really like that he branched out and tried something so different. And so I definitely recommend it. I especially recommend it to people who want to be writers, aspiring novelists, people who've done NaNoWriMo, and anyone honestly interested in the publishing world. I don't know a lot about that world. I didn't know about YA Drinks Night. I don't know what it's like to go on a book tour, and so it was really fun to experience those things through Darcy's eyes and learn more about this world. So if you're interested in that at all, it's really fun to go on this journey with Darcy. I liked it. I think I have a couple critiques about it, but overall I thought it was a really great book, and now I'm gonna spoil stuff, so if you haven't read it, go away. So my biggest complaint about this book is that I didn't love Afterworlds. Darcy's story, Afterworlds. I really liked the beginning. I loved the scene in the airport. I loved her coming down from that. I loved all of that. But afterward, I wasn't super excited about the story. There was a lot of interesting places that it could have gone, and I didn't feel like it really went to any of them. Basically, I really liked the whole plot line with the bad man. I loved her going and killing the bad man. I loved her being obsessed with these ghosts. I loved her being obsessed with all of the girls in the front yard. I wanted to know more about the bad man and why he did the things he did, and if he was haunted by these girls, and like these girls' stories, because we only really got to know about Mindy. And so I loved every time the story shifted to Lizzie trying to fix things in the real world with her powers. I just was so bored all the times she was with Yama. I don't know, I found it a little disconcerting that in the first scene where she meets Yama, he just kisses her. First of all, that's not really okay, buddy. You can't just kiss a girl. You can't just, like, kiss a girl that you meet without, like, asking if it's okay, or having a conversation about how you have a connection. And I mean, there's something to be said for, like, feeling the moment, and then, like, yes, it seemed right, and so I kissed her. But, like, he just freaking kisses her. And then all of a sudden she's just in love with him. And all of a sudden they're dating. What? I don't know. So I was just very disinterested in her relationship with Yama. And I didn't even feel like this book was a romance. I know that it was a paranormal romance. But I was so much more interested in what Lizzie could do with her powers than whatever was going on with Yama. It just wasn't the kind of book that I'd normally read. And also I kind of felt that Darcy was sort of an amateur writer. I mean, it was good for a first novel. She repeated herself all the time. Like, I wish I'd kept a tally of how many times she referred to the scar on her face in the shape of a teardrop. We know about your scar, Lizzie. We were there with you. We remember. But she refers to the scar on her face in the shape of a teardrop like 20 plus times. Drove me crazy. And every single time she said the word psychopomp, saying that she needed another word for it, we get it. We understand. It was like she kept using it but had to remind us every single time, oh, but that's a terrible word. I have to come up with a different one, but like I'll do it later because I'm busy right now. It sort of made the faith that Paradox had in this story a little flimsy. I felt like that didn't feel like a $300,000 book deal caliber book. Also, this was another thing. The whole thing about how, like, whether or not writers have the juice, and how Imogen was worried about reading Darcy's story because she was afraid that she wasn't gonna have the juice, and then how Darcy then had to read the story after they'd talked about that they had feelings for each other. When that chapter starts and you're reading Imogen's story, maybe I'm just overcritical and maybe this just isn't a book that was written for me, but I really disliked it. I thought it was bad. And I was thinking as I was reading this, oh no, Darcy's gonna have to like grapple with the fact that her girlfriend doesn't have the juice, and they're gonna have to have a whole conversation about this, and it's gonna be really awkward. And then she's interrupted and she stops reading and is like, that was amazing, my girlfriend has the juice. I really didn't like Pyromancer. I just didn't. And I really thought that that's where they were going with that. But it wasn't. I don't know, I thought it would have been more interesting if Pyromancer just didn't do well, you know? Like, I liked that they brought in that sort of weird fluke on the internet can bring wild success to a book randomly. I liked that element of it, but it just, I don't know, I liked having to see an author go through their book not doing well, and having Darcy having to deal with Imogen's feelings and emotions about that. I don't know. Anyway, Darcy's story I found more interesting, but again, there were things missing from it. I loved her going to New York. I loved her being super overwhelmed. I loved the whole theme about how she was very young. I really like when books make relationships very realistic, and I really liked the issues that her and Imogen ended up having, and how Imogen had to go take some time away, and how Darcy had to like internalize all of these things that Imogen had said to her about how she thought that she got her book deal too young, that she met Imogen too young, that she was going through all of these emotional relationship things that were all new to her, and she was really emotionally behind. A lot of the problems that she was having with Imogen were immature things that she needed to grow out of. I like that they took that break and that they came back stronger, and I appreciated all of that. But she was being so irresponsible about money. It drove me crazy that she got that apartment in the first place, because that was a horrible decision. But then, after going through this whole thing about how she had a $17 a day food budget, and how she was so irresponsible about not getting her place at the college that she had deferred a year for, and all of these horrible things, she never really had to like face those things. The only thing she had to face was that Imogen left her for a little bit. So we don't ever actually get to the point where she has to move out of her apartment, and I thought maybe Imogen was gonna move in and so they could split rent, but that didn't happen. It's not like she has another book deal after this one that's gonna like recoup the cost of all of the money she spent on noodles all year. I did like that it ended with her, you know, saying she was gonna go to college and how Imogen would visit her and that was all gonna be okay. And so I guess there was a little bit of her facing reality at the end there, but she never was really punished for how reckless and irresponsible she was with money that first year in New York. And that bothered me a little bit. So I think it did end with her learning her lesson, but not to the extent that I think she should have. Okay, let's talk about some things that I liked about this book, because I did just slam it a lot. I really liked how in tune with today's internet book community this book felt. There was a lot of little slang phrases like, oh, I'll TBR that, or this gave me all the feels. It's really funny. I actually asked Scott Westerfeld if Sanderson had been inspired by John Green, and he said that he actually, obviously because books take a long time, started writing this book before John Green had reached the level of success that he's at right now. This was sort of pre The Fault in Our Stars mania. And so it was just sort of interesting that that character feels so in line with John Green now, because he sort of was invented. Scott Westerfeld just sort of imagined this rock star author, charismatic guy. Now we've seen it happen. I love just all the talk about writing. There were a lot of really great quotes in this book that I wish I'd written down like any of them, but there were a lot of really great sort of inspiring quotes. It just made me feel really excited for NaNoWriMo this year, and just made me excited about writing in general. And I think that as far as that goes, it's such a great book for writers. It shows you like the highs and lows of being a writer very, very well. And I appreciated that, and I loved that it got really gritty, and that there were a lot of moments of Darcy really struggling to write, because writing is not glamorous. It's so hard, and it's usually not even fun. The fun part is definitely like finishing, which most people don't get to. So overall, again, I think this book is great. I definitely had some issues with it. I think it was an interesting choice, you know, to write a book that included writing from a young author, because you can definitely feel the difference between his writing and Darcy's writing. I don't know if that meant that the book suffered a little, because it did feel like it had amateur writing in it, but I think if you can sort of detach yourself from it being amateur writing and looking at this as the story of a young author writing her first novel, it becomes more impressive, I think. The fact that a really well-seasoned author could figure out what it felt like and what it should sound like to write that kind of novel was really impressive to me. It didn't make for the most exhilarating reading experience, I think, because, like I said, I didn't love her story. But I think that it was a very interesting thing to do, and I appreciated it for what it was. Afterworlds by Scott Westerfeld is great. You should read it. If you have already read it, let me know in the comments what you thought of it. God, I know I had a lot of other things I wanted to say about this book, but I said a lot of them. So book reviews are hard. They're so hard. But yeah, let me know in the comments your thoughts. I would love to hear what you thought, especially if you're also an aspiring writer. I think that that's just such a interesting book for that purpose. I've said that like 1,000 times already. So I'm gonna end this video. Thank you guys for watching. Leave me comments down below, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye.